Welcome back everybody. Today I'm making kind of a different video with a program that I've never used before on this channel, and that's Unreal Engine. The one thing that got me into 3D, the first thing ever, was Unreal Engine and the unbelievable capability that this engine is capable of doing. I absolutely love this engine to death. And this video specifically is not going to be a fundamental tutorial about how to use the engine. It's more so going to be a tips and tricks about how to do a scene in general. Any scene that you want, you can apply some of these fundamentals to it and it will look serviceable. It will look decent by the end of it. And this one scene in specific that I'm gonna be walking you through it's a medieval Gothic kind of church. I'm going to be taking you step by step from the very beginning, starting with just a single block, and then we're going to end on this scene that you see in front of you. One of the first things that I recommend you do as soon as you boot up the engine, and like the first line strokes essentially of your project, is create the building blocks of what you're going to make using simple shapes. And what I mean by that is, let's say for example with what I'm making right now, I'm going to start off by making the walls of the church, and none of this has to be concrete or anything. Like, you can end up changing the shape of the building, you can end up increasing its size, giving it more geometry. That doesn't really matter. But one thing that I've always struggled with is procrastination. As I am working on my projects, so long as I am moving and I'm adding things and I'm changing things, I'm progressing. But if I try to make everything perfect from the get-go, then I'm just going to be stuck and I'm not gonna go anywhere. So there is also something in art in general called the 80% rule. And the 80% rule essentially is, when you see a speed reel or fast compilation of someone drawing something or sculpting something, you will see that in the beginning they're making all of the big shapes in the beginning, like they're not focusing on the finer details until they have most of the basic shapes done. They get the big blobs in a quarter of the time. They end up finishing more than 80% of their project, and then the remainder of the time, which is most likely more than half of the time, is spent fine-tuning that last 20%. And that's kind of the same approach that I like to do, and it's what I recommend you also do when you're making things in general, which is get the basic shapes down, finish 80% of the project first by modeling in the important parts, and then slowly but surely add in more detail. I'm focusing on the bigger shapes, and part of that is I'm making the walls. First I'm making it using these basic planes. At the end, sometimes I will just end up deleting these walls as I place the actual real walls that I'm gonna use. That doesn't really matter. These are just basic shapes. They're essentially just prototypes. They are the main frame of what I'm gonna be building. Sometimes I end up just applying the texture to these planes, and sometimes I'm going to be adding in bricks later and actual mesh walls over these, and then I'm gonna end up deleting them. But they just help me picture better how everything is gonna look. this church building. I feel like I'm satisfied with this so far. And next I'm going to start blocking in some of the interiors. And this church, I'm going to be adding to it a second story and pillars. And again, I'm just using basic blocks and basic planes to place everything in, to know exactly where everything is going to be going in here. Then obviously a church is going to be having a lot of benches or rows, chairs where believers are going to be praying in. So for that I'm going to again model them in and blocking in these benches using these blocks that I just extended. And I feel like I'm satisfied with this. Again, none of this is concrete or anything. Maybe at one point I'm going to move things, I'm going to reduce the number of some things. It doesn't really matter. I'm just getting a basic idea and feel for how the church is going to look. After which, using the models that I have, some of these models I've gotten from Quixel, some of them I have bought on the Epic Game Store, some of them have been provided for free, in some of the free section in the store over the years. So I'm going to be using these models to create my scene. Over here I'm just grabbing a bench and I'm going to be placing it somewhere around these boxes that I've made. And then after I'm done with them, I'm going to delete the original boxes. I'm going to be fast forwarding a lot because obviously a lot of this work is just the same thing repeated over a long period of time, which you don't need to sit through that. So I'm going to be cutting and fast forwarding a lot. Just sit tight and I'm going to slowly show you how to transform something as basic as this into a realistic setting. Now I'm going to start focusing on the pillars, and again I'm going to start focusing on the pillars and then deleting the original meshes. Then I'm going to be creating the doors and windows. Some of these models are actually paid for models, but you can also exchange them for any Quixel models that you think fit, and there are a lot actually. Unfortunately, Quixel models are now, I believe, paid because they were free for the longest time, but ever since 2024 ended, I believe, or maybe January, they have all become paid, which is unfortunate, but that was kind of expected, since like having thousands of incredibly high quality meshes and textures and materials for absolutely free just didn't really make sense. So it was kind of expected. As you can see here, I'm still just blocking out details. I'm not really fine-tuning anything, which is why you see the textures are repeating horribly. Like this wall looks absolutely awful because the texture is repeating a lot. So this wall, like it's not serviceable at all. It doesn't look realistic, and obviously because the planes aren't exactly aligned, the texture even breaks up at certain points. But I'm just slowly adding in detail now, and bit by bit I'm going to flesh out things as need be. This wall is going to be fixed properly later on. The windows over here have their own bricks attached to them, and as you can see, the sizes don't match, but there is a certain trick to that which works on the walls or on any flat plane, which is something that's called world alignment. It's a node in the texture blueprint that you can add to it, which is world aligned textures, and this is an absolute godsend when it comes to texturing material in this engine, because you can essentially make it so that the texture is completely uniform across all planes, even when they aren't properly aligned or they aren't properly sized. So you don't really need to care about something like that. I'm going to be applying these world aligned textures on my walls at a later point in this project. If you want to see an in-depth tutorial on how you can do it manually when you create your own textures, or even when you edit an already existing texture to have world alignment on it, just write it down in the comments, and I'm going to create an in-depth tutorial of how to do it both ways. After finishing the walls and the doors, I start then adding the little archways beneath the floor, because I feel like this just doesn't look realistic. I mean, you never really see floors or stories being held up by just pillars. Archways make a lot of sense to add them here as kind of supports beneath the floor, and they add a lot of artistic sense to it. So I'm just going to be adding and duplicating them beneath the floor, attaching to all of the pillars. You will see me flip-flopping between the different floors, because I didn't really have an idea in mind of how I'm gonna make the floor look. So I first added this texture, but then I didn't really like it later on, and I ended up changing it multiple times. So you'll see the floor changing multiple times as I'm editing this project. I ended up sticking with a kind of black and white chess-like texture, which you will be seeing later on in this video. But yeah, I'm just adding in the texture, and then I'm resizing it since it looks super tiny on this massive floor. I end up adding a plane, and I stretch it out really long because I want a kind of rug or a carpet to be on the floor in the middle row. I just think it looks cool and it fits the setting. So I end up just adding a long strip plane, and I add onto it a texture that I grabbed from Quixel, and also add on it a kind of carpet decal. Also, it's important to note that since the plane is elongated to an extreme level, it's also very important that you go into the texture itself and change its scale to better fit this plane, since it's incredibly stretched right now because of this massive scale. And I'm going to be showing you a kind of hack which you can use to kind of break up monotony in your textures if it's repeating a lot, without really tackling the blueprints, because I know a lot of people feel like the blueprint system in Unreal Engine is incredibly daunting and complicated, and I get that. Like, when I first started using Unreal Engine, it was incredibly complicated and very scary to tackle it. So I'm going to be showing you a kind of trick where you can break up the texture a little bit and make it look not as repetitive as it would if you just left it the way that I'm leaving it right now. I ended up deciding to add some vegetation, so I ended up downloading a couple of plants from the marketplace and just placed them inside some, I don't know what they're actually called, I can't remember the name of that object, but you get the idea. By the way, this is not optimized for gaming by any means. None of this is really optimized for games at all, because obviously you're adding a lot of different meshes and you're not really taking into account draw distance, you're not taking into account LODs, nanite compatibility, none of that. I'm not really taking into account how dense some of these meshes are and how high res these textures are. So just keep that in mind. This isn't a tutorial on how to create a scene for a game. Maybe you can take these fundamentals and apply them to the scene in the game, but fundamentally speaking, this scene is horribly optimized for a game. Just keep that in mind. Then I ended up grabbing a couple of lanterns, wall lanterns and normal standing lanterns, and then I ended up adding them. Later on the line I'm going to be adding point lights inside of them so that they can glow, because this is going to be the shots and the renders that I'm going to be grabbing from this scene is going to be a nighttime lighting, so I'm going to be lighting up these lanterns later on. I think that it's going to look a lot better as a night shot. It's important to note that this scene might look somewhat ugly right now because I am editing this scene at medium settings in the engine, because I can usually work with this engine at the normal epic settings, but when I'm recording the performance just dips too much and it's not really the greatest, so I'm dropping the settings down to medium right now. But that's not really that big of a deal, at least not in the early stages. Later down the line, when you're finalizing everything and you're setting up your lighting, you do want to raise the settings a little bit because the lighting varies drastically, because at this level of settings you're not really using high quality lighting or global illumination and stuff like that, so just keep that in mind. Right now it's fine to drop the settings down to get better performance, but at a later point in time you will absolutely need to raise the settings up to get proper lighting, volumetric fog and the global illumination. Then I ended up adding this upper level in the church, which is supposed to be like the main focal point of the place, so I ended up giving it some height and I ended up adding stairs and then upper section, not really upper, it's just slightly elevated. After this I ended up adding some bookshelves because I just think that it fits. Having a lot of books and a lot of like religious books and whatnot, I think it fits this setting very much. I ended up not really liking the way that these bookshelves were looked, so I just deleted them later and I replaced them with the bookshelves that I placed on the sides of the church. I grabbed a couple of these statues and I placed them in the middle, since these statues are supposed to represent, they would be like the gods of this church. So I ended up placing them in this manner, although I ended up deleting the middle one and I'm going to be adding a different thing to it. But yeah, you can see slowly but surely this project is starting to look a little better bit by bit. I decided to delete the center statue and add in this coffin looking object as if it's the burial place of a very high important figure. But you can notice that this coffin just looks weird, like it looks super dark, as if light is just not hitting it. So the way that you fix that is you right click on the model, you go to the parent model in the content drawer, and then you right click on that model and you go to the parent material of this mesh. When you open up the blueprint and you go down to the ambient occlusion node, you will see that it is set to 0, and all you need to do to fix it is just set it to 1, and you will see that the mesh is now fixed and it's receiving lighting appropriately. Over here, this is the trick that I mentioned before about how you can break the monotony of the texture that you have. And this is also an aspect of how this scene isn't really game optimized, because this many meshes is devastating to any game state. So this is absolutely not recommended, and it is not optimized in the slightest for a game scene. But since we don't really care about the optimization, because all we're really doing is just creating an artistically beautiful scene, we don't really care about how optimized it really is. I ended up downloading a bunch of different books from the Quixel marketplace, and I just added them to these bookshelves in different orientations and different looks to kind of change and not make it look super boring. At this point, we have long passed the 80% mark, and now I'm just adding in the final touches to this scene, which is, I just grabbed some blinders and I added them over the windows to cover up the different size bricks that are attached to these windows. I've also fixed the tiling problem of the walls where the sizes of the planes mattered. I added in the the world alignment nodes to these materials to make them properly align with each other. And I ended up changing the ceiling because I felt that the lighting wasn't really that great. So at night it was really hard to get proper illumination, and so I decided to make the ceiling made up of half glass, half bricks, so that I can have the moonlight shining in on the chairs and statues to give it a really beautiful blue lighting effect over the fog and everything. And so I ended up having these archways going across the pillars. While I kinda forgot to record these last bits, but I'm going to be showing you in these renders that I created, which is I ended up adding this like painting that I just downloaded as a artistic choice, and I added on top of it like these blinders as well that I have over the windows to kinda cover it up. And that's pretty much it. I just added the point lights to the lanterns to set up the lighting properly. Now, if you want to see a tutorial, a proper tutorial on how to set up lighting the way that I have right here, as you see in these shots, then just write it down in the comments. I haven't shown you a lot regarding the rendering or the lighting setup, and I'm gonna be real with you, the lighting setup is almost 50% of the whole shot. So if you want to see a lighting tutorial on how to set up lighting similar to this, just press the like button and tell me in the comment section below. And by the way, these photos didn't just get rendered and then I put them in the video like this. Whenever I render out shots of scenes like these, I always end up passing them through Photoshop and I give them a little bit more refining. So if you also want to see a Photoshop tutorial on how you can enhance renders, type them down in the comments and I'm going to be creating a video for that as well. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.